Um, All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining. I see we have over 20 participants, and it's so fun, like recognizing some of the names, like our little landscape community with, unfortunately we can't meet in person right now, but really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to get a little distraction, maybe learn something. We'll all learn something. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on designing yourself native landscapes. And this is in partnership with the Alameda County Water District and the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, and it is going to be taught by Juanita Salisbury. So we're in for a treat. And just from some of the logistics about Zoom, let's see here. There we go. All attendees are muted, but that shouldn't, prohibit you from speaking up. So feel free to ask questions and type in the chat. There's two ways that you'll be able to contribute, which is like raising your hand, and we'll unmute you so you can ask questions, but all questions will be held till the end. We're looking to wrap up with and leave time for Q&A around 8 p.m. And the second way, if something comes to mind, you don't want to wait, you can type it in the chat and we'll review those questions at the end. And it is recorded, this webinar is recorded, so you can, if you miss something, you can always go back and look at the recording. I'll be sending you all an email with the link. So a little bit about the Alameda County Water District. I'll do a few brief slides and then talk about ACWD, some of our programs, and then hand it over to Juanita. But just, we're one of the sponsors, and we just want to let our customers know that our mission is to provide a reliable supply of high quality water at a reasonable price to our customers, which is no small feat in today's day and age. But we have long-standing roots in our community. So we were founded over 100 years ago. And as you may imagine, our service area has changed quite a bit. Now we serve 357,000 customers and 84,000 individual connections. And that's spread all over Fremont, Newark, and Union City. So it's a common misconception Alameda County Water District does not serve the whole county. We have a really large service area in the South Bay, Fremont, Newark, and Union City, which makes up about 100 square miles. We're lucky enough to have a very diverse water supply portfolio. So you can see on the screen here, our three main sources are the State Water Project, San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and the Alameda Creek Watershed Runoff. And just to highlight one of them, the Alameda Creek Watershed Runoff includes the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin. So underneath Fremont, Newark, and Union City is this massive groundwater reservoir. That was actually why we were founded in 1914, to protect that, the integrity of the basin. And over time, users were pumping out the water, and the seawater from the bay was starting to intrude the fresh water source. So for over 20 years, we've been monitoring and trying to keep it as fresh as possible. And we've made a lot of success combating that saltwater intrusion. So the Alameda Creek watershed runoff is one of our largest sources, 40% of our supply, and that includes the groundwater and surface water from the runoff of some of the mountains in the area. To highlight some of our programs tonight, especially for residential customers, you can see them several listed there, even our landscape workshops. We do offer rain barrel rebates at $100 per rebate, and it's a great time to buy one because the rainy season will begin. Hopefully, cross your fingers that it'll be a wet winter for all of us. But one I really wanted to highlight tonight is the turf replacement rebate. Oops. We do offer $1 per square foot for anyone that gets inspired tonight, learns how to design their native garden, and is thinking about replacing their lawn. For single family customers, we can provide up to $1,500. So this would be a good time to get design ideas. And now that you know about the rebate, you can get some of the investment back that you spent. So I talked about the rain barrel rebates, but one of our newest rebates is the Rachio Smart Sprinkler Controller rebate, which is a weather-based irrigation controller system that it uses the local weather to manipulate your schedule on your irrigation. So if it's super rainy or if there's a lot of moisture in the air, it'll automatically dictate your schedule for your irrigation, which can save water. They're typically like $300 on the market, probably $270 or like $280, and we offer it for customers at $100. So we're giving you a big discount if that's something you're interested in. So our partner agency is BAWSCA, and we one of our sources of supply we purchased from San Francisco. So BAWSCA represents all the agencies and counties and even universities that purchase water from SFPUC, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and they serve collectively 1.8 million people. So you can see in that image all the counties and areas that buy water from SFPUC that are part of BAWSCA. And today, this program is really focused on outdoor water use and conservation it's one of the single largest untapped opportunity for conservation in the service area is really honing in on outdoor education and resources. So that's kind of the objective of tonight. And there's only a few more of these workshops left. So as you can see on the slide, the next one will be November 17th. And then the last one of the fall season is on December 16th. So you can go to register at bayareaconservation.org. And if you're interested in learning more about those topics, and then we will also offer more in the spring. So this is a spring workshop season, and then there's a fall one as well. And if you are thinking about what plants you want, I know Juanita will get into a lot of that, but there's this great resource that will show you images of the plants, give you a lot of information about each type, how big they are, what kind of nutrients they need. And so this is brought to you by ACWD and the BAWSCA organization to really hone in on plants that work well for our area. Just a quick disclaimer, nothing said tonight directly reflects ACWD or BAWSCA, and we are here for you. We actually have a new water conservation specialist that just joined the ACW team, and we are happy to have more help to answer your questions, be there for you, provide information. So if there are any questions, feel free to type in the chat or give us a call or email. And without further ado, I want to introduce our esteemed speaker tonight, Juanita Salisbury. She has a PhD from the University of Florida, as well as a Bachelor of Science. If that wasn't enough, she started a landscape architecture company in 2009, and then also established the Palo Alto Primrose Way Pollinator Garden in 2016. So I don't know about you, but I'm definitely looking forward to learning more about this and some of her endeavors. So Juanita, why don't you take it away?
Okay. All right. All right, let's start the slideshow from the beginning. Okay, and I'm going to, let's see, okay, so I'm unmuted there. All right, can everybody hear me? All right, good. So as Megan mentioned, I do have a PhD in psychology, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture. My area of psychology in biopsychology was studying ingestive behavior, that is eating and drinking. And so now when I do these native plant habitats and talk about them, I talk about it from the aspect that plants are food and what that means in terms of how best to use them, so that you're doing no harm by using them. And in 2016, I started the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden with a public pollinator garden, and you can see some of that information on Facebook and Instagram at Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. And I also have a YouTube channel, Primrose Way, that showcases some of the techniques and fun times out in these various gardens. We have 5 gardens now. The first, as I mentioned, we have the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, which was literally around the corner from my house, and we transformed that after I approached the city of Palo Alto and said, can we make this into a pollinator garden? It was basically just a strip of grass with some cherry trees, and they said yes. And following that, we installed the Arcadia Place Pollinator Garden, then the Island Drive Pollinator Garden, the Gwynda Street Pollinator Garden, and the last one that we just installed in just a year ago now, at Hopkins Avenue. So, and if you Google Pollinator Garden Palo Alto, this will pop up on Google Maps. And actually tomorrow we're starting a project to link the Primrose Garden and the Gwynda Street Garden, using the 10-foot wide parkway strip between the sidewalk and Embarcadero Road here. So lots more to come. Stay tuned.
Hey,
So
Juanita,
yes,
sorry to
yeah.
interrupt. There was a comment about potentially getting your screen larger. Like, is there any way to full screen your slides or zoom in?
I think that this is the size that they get. I don't know how to make it bigger. Let me try.
Because there's also ways you can do it as a
I mean,
audience member, like
yes.
minimizing the screen size of the speakers or potentially going to full screen mode on your end that
Yeah.
may assist the person that would like the size
Yeah.
increased.
Yeah. This is using up my entire screen on here, so I don't know how to make it bigger without losing any of it. I mean, it's literally like at the edge of my screen already. So
Okay, yeah, we see, or at least I see some black bars on the edge, but um, if
yeah, I think that's pretty typical for a PowerPoint presentation because that's the aspect ratio of the picture. It doesn't go full screen like that. Otherwise, everything would be kind of skinny
oh, I
or
see.
flattened. Yeah. So this is how it's always looked for doing these presentations. Interesting question. I'll have to see. There's these little things at the bottom of my screen. I don't see anything that looks like it would make it bigger.
Yeah, so as I said, no worries if nothing can be done on your end, but there's potentially options to go into your settings and either go full screen or use the view options and get that a little more zoomed in. So sorry about that. Continue.
Very good. Okay, well, what I'm going to talk about tonight, and I'm going to stop my video so that I can save some bandwidth. So that gets rid of me, but I'm still here. And so what I'm talking about tonight is really a design process. And this is my landscape architecture coming out. First of all, I'm going to talk about the basics of native plant design and what it really means to use native plants. There's something very special about our California native plant species that really people need to consider this as a first thing when they're using them. And then I'm going to talk about how you lay out your landscape, site analysis and measurement, so that you can make a plan to plan out your plants and get them installed correctly. We'll talk then about developing your plant palette, what plants to use, kind of like a painting palette. You'll be painting with plants instead. I'll talk about basic planting design and how to plant, and then I'll briefly cover some maintenance and irrigation considerations. Our native plants are not just plastic plants that you can get and look good all the time. They're living creatures, and they have a role that they play in the environment. That role is that plants are the beginning of everything. And this is critical, really, when people need to realize the function of plants. Plants are the way that energy from the sun is then converted into energy by plants and then transferred further up the food chain. So the energy here in the sun, the energy gets transferred into food, plants, and then animals that eat the plants, like this caterpillar, and then this big caterpillar gets fed to baby birds. This is how the sun's energy gets efficiently sent up the food chain. There's no other way to do it. So, and it's critical when you look at plants this way because they are food for insects, and then insects are the food for other organisms. And as a rule, native insects only eat the native plants that they evolved with. A monarch caterpillar will not eat anything else but milkweed. Okay, and so the chemical specificity of insects and plants is generally the rule. It's not the exception. So pollinators that we have are bees and mostly bees. They basically maintain the plants, and then other animals that eat the plants, like the cats, how the energy gets transferred up the chain. So pollinators play that key role, kind of a keystone species at maintaining the plants, and then those plants get used in the environment by insects, which provide protein for birds. Caterpillars are the preferred food for baby birds. It takes about 7,000 caterpillars to make a single chickadee, for example. So just again, this is really important. And if you think about plants as food, everything follows from here. So if you plant native plants, you're going to have native insects like these caterpillars coming in, turning into butterflies later. These caterpillars feed birds. If you don't have native plants, there aren't going to be caterpillars and you're not going to have baby birds. So why is it important? Okay. This is key here. Because native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators, it's best to avoid making your garden an ecological sink or a trap. Okay, and a lot of people just plant native plants and they think that's good. That is good, but we have to think about making these plants really perform what they're supposed to do in the environment, and that is provide food. An ecological sink is something in the environment that attracts organisms, okay? And because of the attraction, it makes them easier to be killed through predation or other means. So an example of this is night lighting. You've all seen moths flying around lights at night. That's terrible. About 60% of insect species can be killed per night through exhaustion or increased predation. So we don't want to attract insects to our yard like these beautiful hair-streaked butterflies or this beautiful Melanopygus, Bombus melanopygus, the black-tailed bumblebee here, just so that they die. Okay, so one thing that we can do that's easy, and habitats and gardens really start inside the house with blackout curtains to provide a block to prevent light pollution at night, and outdoor lights on motion sensors. Simple thing that we can do. So we want to use native plants because they're great for water use, but we don't want to use them and create an ecological sink. So let's take a step back and talk about how we design a garden. Stepping back from plants, now that I've gone over that part quite readily here. So as a landscape architect, I'm tasked with transforming spots in people's backyards like this. So this particular client had a pool here, non-native trees, a great view of the mountains back there. That was really the only nice view. They like to eat outside. They like to barbecue. They had a change in elevation. So lots going on here. They have unconnected downspouts where the water would just run off. Okay, so consider your specific functions that you want to have in your yard. What are your opportunities? Okay, this helps you in setting goals for your design. And those goals then lead to your concept. So measure your site. This is key. This way you can have a plan. And this is the actual measurements from that site. So use graph paper. It makes it easy to draw to scale. And you can see the little tiny squares here on this. I think these are 1/8 of an inch. And I lay out soft measuring tapes starting from one edge and using the edge of the house to keep it straight, going all the way across, starting here at 0 and going across. The width of the yard is 70 feet, 4 inches. And that way I can measure where the windows start and stop, where the doors are. These are doors that open outwards, where the downspouts are, and this is a slider. I can also make notes of everything else on this, where there are trees, where the edges of lawn, any hardscape, fences, downspouts, existing lighting, electrical outlets, any notable features, to really give you an idea about what you're working with. You want to make notes of views and slopes, what the adjacent properties are, of course, which way north is. And just a little detail. So these red lines here with the arrow show how I lay out soft tapes. These are the ones that are on the big reels that you reel out. So I start from one edge, pull it all the way across, leave it there until I've gotten the measurements done from there. And then I'll use a corner of the house, pull the tape straight down to the fence line, and I'll do it again over here. And you can see that the depth of the yard from the 0 mark here is 48 feet, 3 inches. Okay, so considering, I'm assuming that there are some people who have a blank slate. And so I always ask people, how do you want to use the area? Because I'm all about function here. How do you want to make use of the site? What are the functions? So do you want to eat outside? Do you want a barbecue? Do you want a fire pit? Where's your house? And so you look at how these functions relate to each other, okay? Dining is closely related to barbecue, fire pit maybe not so related, and so on. These are general ideas for getting an idea of how you want to have circulation in your yard. From that, you can lay a piece of tracing paper over your site measurement and then consider your movement between these functions. Remember, here are those doors. There's the slider. So you're coming out here and here. We've got to change an elevation, but we still need to get from here to here. And so here's that circulation that we were looking at before. Here's the fire pit. Here's the dining area. Dining can take advantage of this great view that's going on. You have a view from the window and so forth. So that's how you get some of your functions. You have a bad view here, and then this gives you a sort of a general sense of where you can have vegetation. Once you figure out where the humans are going to be, then you can figure out where the plants go. So laying another piece of tracing paper on the top, remember form follows function here. So we need some steps to get down out of the house, and then steps down to get down to the slider. So what I did is I figured steps here, and I did kind of a square design, and figured the fire pit could go down here, dining could go over here in general, maybe some planting here. We could make a wall come around like this rather than the old one that used to be that way, and it would come around, turn into steps, and return back this way. Shows you where you can put some big trees. So this is how you decide where you can put your big stuff. Once you decide where the humans are going to go, then you can kind of start figuring out where the plants might go. Okay. Place another piece of tracing paper on top. We've already looked at where our trees can go. And this is how you decide where shrubs and perennials can go. Okay, so big marking pen here showing some shrubs in masses, and masses are best to do of a single species because they're much more aesthetically pleasing to look at rather than one of this, one of that, one of this, and there's no cohesive way to look at the garden. It becomes kind of a mess. This way it's more organized when you have your species grouped together like this. Okay, so we have a grouping of shrubs underneath this tree, a grouping of shrubs underneath this tree, and so forth. And then once you figure out where the shrubs go, then you can do smaller stuff like perennials. So that's basically how you figure out where plants go. And you can continue to refine your measurements and what you want to use. And so here we have some graph paper. This is a 1/4 inch scale and how big the furniture is, because you want it to be able to fit in the site. Okay. So this was the refined concept here. As you can see, here's the house that we were looking at before. And here's those doors opening outward, steps coming down to some hardscape, more steps going down to the slider, little sitting area here, fire pit area over here, the dining area related to the barbecue and the smoker. And at the very last minute, the owner wanted to put in a pizza oven, so we popped out a little space for that. They love this. They said, we like how you've laid out the trees and everything like that. So let's do the planting plan. Notice I don't have any plants noted. It's just circles with nothing on it. This is a concept. A construction drawing that you might want to give to your gardener, well, that's probably the next slide, will have plants on it. And so the way that you lay out plants in the landscape so that they're spaced correctly and not overcrowded is that you may want to add some pathways for maintenance, and then you add your plants from your plant palette, and you do that showing them as circles at their mature diameter, okay, because things grow and get big. And so with circles at their mature diameter, you can have your large stuff go in, okay, and then you want to go to the next biggest stuff, and then smaller things. So you notice that I have most of these circles just touching or overlapping, and they can overlap about 25% or so. And there's room still underneath the large things for other stuff. You can have plants along a pathway. This is a very nicely aesthetically pleasing thing because it reinforces this line of the path. Same along here. Anytime you have an edge, take advantage of it to show how the space is organized by reinforcing the line. Okay. So place large trees first, then shrubs, then layer in perennials, vines, bulbs, succulents, and annuals. And don't forget to plan for the plants underneath the tall trees and shrubs. This is what an actual construction drawing looks like, a planting plan. And don't be afraid. The key things to take away here is, again, to lay out your plants in masses, okay? Large plants and trees towards the back, smaller, lower plants at the edges near walkways and patios. So here, for example, these 3 plants, I have a little leader line coming up saying it's 3 garjas. These are gardenia jasmine, which are not native, but I like them because they smell good, shown at the mature diameter, and you see they're connected by a line. So that's a group of 3. Then there's another group here, 9 penstemon heterophyllus, okay, that are shown in a group. So this is what a planting plan looks like. This is what you would get from a landscape architect, and how we put plants in. So we put in our large things first, and then we layer in plants underneath, large things towards the back, smaller things towards the front, okay? And this is something that you could give with a list of plants to your gardener or your landscape contractor. They could acquire the plants and install them for you. But the great thing about a plan like this, and it's good to have a plan because then you know how many plants you need and how much it's going to cost. People can give you a cost estimate from it, okay? Now, how to decide what to plant? And because we're talking about California native plants, we have to celebrate California's biodiversity. We are a biodiversity hotspot, one of about 30 on the entire planet. We have about 8,000 species of plants here in California, found nowhere else on the planet, some not even in any other state other than California. And we also have a huge diversity of native bees, about 1,600 species. And we have such a huge number of our native plant species, largely because we have unique ecosystems here, and we have 1,600 species of native bees. These native bees are directly responsible for promoting the speciation of plants. So why are we talking about California native plants? Well, California native plants are great in terms of providing drought tolerance and lower water use. Many of these plants need to be watered maybe once a month during the summertime after they're established. You keep California looking like California. There's a picture of Edgewood Park there. And when you bring in non-native plants, they can escape cultivation. They're very smart and sneaky that way. They can get out there and wreak havoc in natural places and environments, and destroy those ecosystems in which they find a new home. They can also bring in disease and exotic insects that have no place here. So really, with 8,000 species of plants, there's almost no reason to look for anything outside of our own cornucopia of plants. Now, I like to my go-to site to find native plants is the calscape.org website. This is done by the California Native Plant Society, and it is a plethora, it has a plethora of information, and you can find everything that you need here. It's a searchable database, and it provides tons of information about species and resources for finding those California native plants. And from that, you can then create your palette of trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, vines, and succulents. So I took a screenshot of their first page here, and here they have like these links you can click on about Calscape, contact, the planting guide, nurseries where you can find the plants. You can create plant lists to keep track of everything that you're putting in. This actually turns into an Excel spreadsheet, so you can really keep track. And then the butterflies that they feed. And so I looked for California, and yes, indeed, 7,990 plants native to California. And they've broken it down for us, all plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, and so forth. And they even have a section for low water use plants. So how do you search? Well, maybe one question to consider, because remember, plants are food. So you want to think about what organisms you will be feeding when you put these plants in, because the insects will come if you plant native plants. They will find it and eat, because it's about the mealtime, and this is a big buffet for them. And we know that insects are really at risk worldwide. So this is an easy way to help them, as long as we consider that we don't want to make an ecological sink and destroy them once they come in to feed. We know that speciation, that is plants turning into different species, happens more rapidly with pollinators. As I said before, bees are responsible for this. And so those biological factors then become more important than abiotic factors like climate, geology, and water for determining what to plant. California native plants have evolved over thousands and thousands of years to coexist with each other. And here in Alameda County, you can feed up to 104 species of butterflies and moths, and it shows what their host plants are. It tells you what those are, and so forth. So you'll have beautiful butterflies if you plant these plants and don't destroy the larva, which I'll tell you how not to do that. So as I said before, calscape.org has a really in-depth information on plant selection, locating the best species for your site, how to establish plants, and so on. So I'm going to switch over to the internet for a second. So hang on. Let's see, here it is. Okay, so I pulled up Calscape here, and this is their native plant gardening guide.
Juanita, we're still on the PowerPoint slide.
Oh, okay, let me stop that, and then screen share this. Okay, thanks for pointing that out. All right, how's that?
Okay, now we can see the browser. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Megan. All right. Okay, so Calscape, we're on the planting guide page here, and you can see they've got everything listed here. Choosing plants for your climate, drainage conditions, soil moisture conditions. It's such a great site. Chaparral shrubs on north-facing slopes, dry grasses and annuals on south-facing slopes, you know, white sage and buckwheats, all kinds of great things. Choosing plants for your sun condition, how to install new plants, how to water new plants. This is why I'm not going to go in depth on this because this is already here and I don't want to repeat their information. And how to water established plants. And they talk about mycorrhiza a lot here. And mycorrhiza is fungus, mushrooms basically, and they form themselves around tree roots and other plant roots. And fungus is amazing. Fungi are very amazing. It actually provides a method of communication between plant species, which is pretty remarkable. So native plant gardens done correctly will have a huge variety of mycorrhiza growing in the soil, and those mycorrhiza will make the soil conditions not hospitable to non-native plants. So weeds will become less and less over time. And it tells you how to pull moisture from here or there. You can use a bioswale for watering. Okay, lots of different ways to do that. Bubblers coming up, and so forth. Lots of different things about weed control. So, as I mentioned, a lot of really important things. So I'm going to stop this and go back to my PowerPoint here, but people can look at this. All right, screen share and get back to this. Okay, are we back on the?
Yes, yeah, we can see your PowerPoint.
Okay, so we're back on the PowerPoint. All right, so this is why I didn't want to go into depth on these things because my information is slightly different than what they provide. And so in terms of design for function and things like that, and they provide in depth, which would take me forever to go through. So, but basically what you want to start with in these planting plans, when you go through and you pick out your trees, pick your trees out first, you want to start with keystone plant genera. And basically keystones form the backbone of your habitat or your garden. These species help other plant species survive, okay? And keystone species are those then that provide food for dozens or hundreds of types of caterpillar species upon which countless other animals depend. So I always try to get the species that feed the most to get the most bang for the buck out of the space in my garden. And the plants do take care of each other. So the technique is to include at least a few keystone plant species in your garden. Starting with trees, there's a big oak right there. And because we're talking about water, you need to plant trees because trees help save water. Trees will absorb the water and release it into the air, cooling and cleaning it. They form half of the rain cycle, teaming up with the oceans. They circulate water across the land. And you'll probably remember from grade school when they showed you the diagram of the water evaporating up off the ocean, forming clouds, and then heading over to the mountains where the water drops off. That's only half of what happens. Trees actually suck up water from the ground and spew it back out into the air. When you don't have trees, you can have deserts, and they just form nice senses of place. You can see there's my very tall 6'3" husband here underneath, so for scale. So trees first, they provide so much benefit to the environment. So how do you decide on your tree for your location? What I suggest is to first search. So I did one for Alameda County here, which shows 15 trees native And then I ranked them according to the number of butterflies and moths hosted. And so the top one here, and they show, which is the arroyo willow, maybe not a good choice for everybody's garden, but oaks, basically low water use plants that are good to use. Oaks may not fit in your garden, so you say, okay, I need something that will fit. A couple of things that would fit nicely in a small garden is the blue elderberry. Wonderful, very upright structure on these plants, very rapidly growing. If you don't see what you like on this list, then expand your search area and look around. There's lots to choose from. Then pick out shrubs. Again, the way I like to do it is to rank by the number of butterflies and moths hosted, and then choose what will fit for your locations. Then you add your perennials. Perennials, a lot of them don't live a very long time, maybe a season or two, but you can easily replace them and keep the garden fresh. Lots to choose from, certainly. A lot of things to grow from seed as well. Annuals, super easy. Basically, they don't require very much water. You get a huge variety of floral resources. They are the most under threat natives for competition from non-native grasses. A huge variety not typically available in nurseries, so you can get seeds. And if you sow them in place, they'll come up and do their thing in the year, and really are super easy. Many will reseed in place, and you can layer them under taller shrubs. And I like to grow things from seed because we preserve genetic diversity. Plants grown from cuttings are clones and do nothing to promote genetic diversity, which is a real problem. 3 super easy ones that I like to use: poppies, Gilia capitata, and Phacelia tennessetifolia. Super easy to grow in the garden. And actually the maritime poppy, the yellow one that grows out on the coast, is a perennial that will last for several seasons, 4 or more years actually, because it forms a really deep taproot and does not need to be watered after it's established, of course. Another fun one that I like to put in the garden, Clarkia amoena mix here. Super easy. I just toss these seeds onto the ground. And you can see beautiful colors. They just look fresh and lovely. These different colored petals are nectar guides showing the bees where to go. Just a lovely plant. And I encourage everybody to raise things from seed as much as possible. I've got probably 120 species of seeds at home and grow a lot of things. Here I have my toothpick apparatus with a tiny seed that I've cold, moist stratified. Basically, I take a coffee filter like this down here, wet it down after I've labeled what it is, stick it into a bag with the seeds inside. And when they sprout, I check it every few days. I plant them in my very expensive egg carton planters. They're not expensive. This is a great way to recycle these cardboard egg cartons. So that's a great way to get things in your garden. And the great things about seed is that you can store them for a while. You don't have to get on them right away, which is always good, because then you don't have 1-gallon pots overflowing your driveway. So this is a picture from the calscape.org planting guide page. And so one of the components of our native plant design, and we are talking about moisture here, and get those trees in first. The oaks have those deep tap roots that pull up that deep moisture, and then they have lateral roots that are very surface roots along here, and they engage with the endomycorrhiza, the fungus, which allows them to transfer water to other plants, which I think is amazing. So you can utilize a natural irrigation system here. Once these plants are established, the water use is actually quite low. And you can really get a huge range of locally native plants in here because all these plants will support each other. This is my picture that I drew, which it was inspired by that one, because with these gardens, and what I mean by that, when the plants help each other, is that's because they are connected. Okay, they're connected underground, they're connected up above ground, and so the more connections that you make here, and the more complex your garden is, the more successful it will be in terms of these plants surviving, thriving, and really giving you that lush California look that you can get. So some points that are important, I love doing swales for people. That's a great way to re-engage moisture into the ground. And you can plant right into the swale. I like to do geophytes that are bulbs essentially in these swales because they like the moistness in the spring, but then they dry out during the summertime. And then shrubs underneath trees here, which are communicating with the roots of this big tree. And then you can grow vines up into the shrubs. You can do leaf piles, which are important for collecting moisture. Rocks and boulders hold moisture in the soil, okay? And you can get plants that spread by runners to go towards moisture in the soil that's trapped there by piles of leaves and twigs. So lots of different connectivity that'll help make these gardens successful. So here's an example of a swale that I designed for a client recently. They had these big, beautiful redwood trees in their backyard, and this area was an eyesore for them before. They just really wanted to remove these trees. And actually, there's another one off to the left here, which is about 5 feet in diameter. And I said, really, you want to spend about $50,000 to remove these trees? Which I don't think they could do here in Palo Alto. But instead, we created a swale, and these actually are swales for their downspouts. There are little pop-ups inside the swale here. And during the rainy season, this is where the water will flow down into the low point down here. But we have boulders, ferns, and other things. And now they love this area. So we completely transformed what was an eyesore before to something natural and beautiful. And again, boulders hold moisture underneath of them. And so you'll have plants sprouting up at the edges because seeds will get in there, they'll be nice and moist, and then they'll sprout. So, you know, because we're helping pollinators, and they will come when you plant these plants. Remember, things come out early. These little bumblebees, I love bumblebees. The Bombus melanopygus, the black-tailed bumblebee, loves the Ceanothus valley violet that blooms in January. So we have things that bloom all year round. We're blessed here in California with a cornucopia of things that bloom all the time. You can really get a long bloom season going. So as I said before, if you plant these plants, this is what you get. So on Aster chilensis, you get melissoides, amongst other things. You get leaf cutter bees on Eriophyllum confertifolium, another leaf cutter bee on Hylineum puberulum, on Grindelia camporum. This is a great plant, by the way. This is probably a little sweat bee. So lots of great little creatures there. I also like to include asters. Asters are great. They spread by runners, so they are pretty vigorous. And asters are good because it provides pollen for a pollen specialist, a bee that only eats the pollen and feeds it to their young from asters. But the generalist species that will feed on a bunch of different things will also feed on them, like the melissoides. And you can tell melissoides by these furry back legs here. And then we've got bumblebees, and we've got leaf cutter bees. You can always tell that by their abdomens. And then I'm not sure what that one is. 1,600 species, hard to keep track. So in case you're wondering, this is what that garden looked like that we looked through before. Here's that pizza oven that they actually craned over the house, which was really exciting. And here's the steps coming down to where they are going to put some furniture. This was literally the day after they finished it. They just put the mulch in. The fire pit's going to go over here. This is their big dining area. And although that planting plan that we looked at before looked like it was really super full, this is what it looks like when you first plant things. Things are small. So resist the temptation to overplant initially. You can start layering in more things over time, which is actually better for the whole ecosystem here because you have more connectivity between the plants and they help each other more. And that's me enjoying the shade on that 100-degree day that we went out there. So when we talked about these gardens, once you have native plants in, how do you avoid having an ecological sink? Because you're going to attract these insects and you don't want to attract them and kill them because it's not good for the environment. We want to do no harm. So how do you take care of these gardens? We have to realize that many of the insects that we see here spend a lot of time as an egg or a larva. They're not going to be adults for very long. Adults exist basically to mate, lay eggs, and die. So, and remember, these are food for birds. So we want to help our bird friends as much as possible because birds are also undergoing massive extinction right now because they're starving. Easy ways to do that is to provide nesting and shelter for the insects. I can't stress enough how good it is to leave the leaves on the ground. They help prevent the weeds. They hold in soil moisture, insulate the soil, and keep it cool, which is important because hot soil actually encourages pathogens. And leaf mulch actually provides shelter for the insect species to overwinter, and the birds will find them. What happens is that species that eat trees, tree and shrub leaves will drop down as larvae and overwinter. So if you're using a leaf blower, you'll be blowing away larvae or food for birds. And so you've created an ecological sink. And we want to do no harm. Leaves also encourage that fungal growth underground, which we need for communication between plant roots. And so what I like to do is just to rake the leaves to around the areas underneath trees and shrubs, not to put them up against the trunks and stems. And if you don't like the way that these look, what I like to tell people is then put a very thin layer of bark chips over the top, maybe 1 chip thick, so you're not spending a ton of money on bark chips, but basically leave the leaves and you'll have a plethora of birds coming to your yard, and it's really magical. You will also have pollinators, the bee species that maintain the plants so that the caterpillar larva can eat those species. And most of our native bees, actually 70%, nest in the ground. And this is at our Island Drive garden. We have a nice colony that lives there. So we try not to walk on the areas where the colony is, especially where these nest entrances are so. And it's a small area. It's not huge, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet or so. But you'll know that you're being successful if you have nesters. It's really amazing. And so, pruning happens. You want to prune your shrubs, sure, but remember that insects will use these as well for shelter. So you don't want to prune right away until you take a look and see what's happening. So these are actually here in the corner, katydid eggs. And these are excellent food for lizards. And these eggs were here on this plant. This is a dead twig of Scrophularia californica, and they were eggs for about 6 months. I did not trim this, I just left it. So look closely before pruning. And if you prune things, don't compost them, pile them up, and whatever is living in them can find its way out later. Speaking of finding its way out later, a number of species will nest in hollow stems, hollow and pithy stems, such as wasps. Lots of other winged insects do as well. And so this is hummingbird sage, which is hollow. And basically we cut it down to about 8 to 12 inches because that's just enough space for them to lay their egg cells, lay their eggs in little cells there. So, and you can leave the stems coming up like that. Early growth will cover this and you won't even notice it. I like to also use nest boxes because you're going to have pollinators come to your garden when you plant these plants. And this is a great one that I got from Weeby House. And we have some mason bees nesting there. Look at all that pollen though. There's probably 13 of them nesting in each little individual cell here. I also use bamboo stakes, and here is a leaf cutter bee coming out. This is in my own yard. And that surprised me. They really get into everything. And so we make our gardens more complex with log piles. This is at our Gwenda Street garden. And this was rotted out in the center here. One of my volunteers donated these. So that provides complexity and a lot of little niches for critters to get in there and hang out. Maintenance. So once you get your garden in, keep the weeds at bay, and the weeding will go down over time as the soil chemistry changes. You want to irrigate for the first 1 to 3 years to establish and really take a look at what CalScape is recommending for the watering schedules. Wait to prune, and people say, I need to clean up the garden. Actually, no, you don't. You can tidy up the pathways and things like that. But remember, insects are overwintering and they will come out soon. You don't need to fertilize. I amend very sparingly with a handful of compost around the base of plants. Mulch to control weeds initially, and then mulch with leaves. Leave areas and bare dirt for nests. Don't use leaf blowers. Remember, we don't want to create an ecological sink. You don't want to use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. The insects will figure it out. And once you have enough plant diversity in your garden, you'll have a wide array of predators that'll keep everything in check. I always let the annuals dry out first, and then we trim them back to the 8 to 12 inches and collect the seed. And again, we pile up stems on site and any cuttings on site. We don't call anything away. And we're blessed with creatures like this. And so your ongoing decisions as you move forward with your native plant garden, you know, observation and research is important. And I have like one more slide left.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just time checking, but take your time.
Yes. So you want to research as much as possible. CalScape, really the go-to source. Ask yourself, does this plant provide forage for local insect species? Is it a keystone species? How much water is needed? Easy to find the answer to that. Does it provide nesting opportunities? How hard is it to grow from seed? Will it enhance pollinator resources in the garden? Remember, the pollinators are going to help maintain diversity, which is going to be better for the environment. And another critical aspect, which I'm just going to touch on quickly, is how connected is this garden to other natural spaces? What's around your garden? Do you live near a nature preserve? Do you live at a wildland interface? Are you in the city? Are you near a community garden? Because creatures in those spaces will come into your yard. So consider what's around you. I always say, look closely before acting. I didn't start out knowing all this information. I learned it over time. So, and information, that's the way information is. It's not revealed all at once. We're not born knowing everything. And the scale of these insects is very different than ours. So here I was taking a picture of this Silene flower grown from seed. And there's this tiny katydid staring back at me. I did not see it until I later looked at the picture. And this particular caterpillar eats poppies. This is Neoterpes edwardsata, a yellow moth that is all over our poppies. So a lot of life that these gardens will attract. And if you consider the insect perspective and research what native plants will go in, and realize what you're providing with a native plant garden is a giant buffet. You don't want that buffet to be their last meal before they die. You want to help continue the diversity of life. And once you see it, and these gardens will come to life, you'll enjoy your garden so much, because a habitat that you'll be making will be a home for some little creature. And that is the end of my presentation.
Wow, I wish we could all give you a big round of applause.
All right, I'm going to turn my video back on. There I
Yeah,
am.
that was amazing. I am so blown away. It's all the cool photos you showed of your work too really helped kind of solidify the messages and lots of fun facts in there. So we have several questions in the chat I want to get to. And if you have additional ones, please feel free to add. So I'll start with the first one from Anne, and I'll just read the question out. So her question is, my front lawn is across the street from a street light. Is this too much night light that will adversely impact insects? Advice on how to design the garden.
Yeah, so street lamps are a big problem. And really, there's no reason why we need street lamps. I mean, we have technology with LEDs to make these come on with motion sensors. That's, there's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is make our yards as dark as possible at night. And so I encourage everybody, you can get blackout fabric by the yard at Amazon, super cheap. And I actually have tacked it underneath of my curtains. And our yard is pitch black at night. So your own yard can become more of a sanctuary. I'm having conversations with people in Palo Alto about the street lamps. I actually spent 2 years as a lighting designer, and I know that this technology exists because I helped design some things. It like anything else, it takes some time, but these are conversations worth having with our municipalities who control what infrastructure and utilities we have out there in the parkways.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Kathleen B. Her question is, with our climate becoming hotter, should we choose plants from places that have a hotter climate? Does Calscape revise their plant suggestion for a particular area with climate change in mind?
So the typical response here is to plant as local as possible. Some people and this is a discussion that we have in the Native Plant Society a lot, is do we need to be assisting a northerly migration of Southern California species? I do have some Southern California species in my gardens because they're super drought tolerant. And, or you can plant something if what you're seeing is that we're at the northern end of their range, then, maybe it makes a lot of sense to plant that. The plants are very interesting in the ways that they respond to lack of water. Some plants will kind of shrivel up during the hot summer. And then once it rains, they're like, ha, fooled you, I wasn't dead after all. This is how they adapt, and some people don't like the way that looks. And I get that. We have some ground cover salvias in our sages in our gardens that look pretty crispy right now. But in the spring with the rains, they're just like lush and beautiful and carefree. And, it's like, is this the same plant? But then you have other evergreens like your ceanothus, which are beautiful evergreens that have a nice kind of glossy leaf. They stay beautifully green all year long. So, if you have a site that's super hot and dry and like bakes, you may want to try something from Southern California. So yeah, experiment. I don't really think that there's a wrong way to do it. I like to plant as locally as possible based on, what organisms are already present in the environment, because I want to support those first, but provide a big, tasty buffet full of a lot of different items.
Right, you'll have us looking at plants so differently, like, oh, what insect is going to be eating that?
Mm-hmm.
She had a follow-up question, Kathleen did. Is there a list of keystone plants?
So the way that you determine a keystone species is by the number of species that it supports in the food web. So, and another great database to look at is the Plant Finder that's provided through the National Wildlife Federation's Plant Finder database. And they actually show more species than the Calscape does. So that's basically how you decide what the keystones are, is the ones that provide the biggest meal for as many species as possible, because really, one thing providing food and habitat for a bunch of things is a good way to start. They don't really say this is a keystone species, but that's what a keystone species is.
Yeah, so you're saying the ones that get like the most bang for your buck, like the biggest benefit.
Right. And some people worry about their plants getting eaten down to a nubbins, especially if there isn't anything else for insects to eat. And what I tell people is, so a couple of things can happen. If you don't have enough diversity in your yard, generally what's recommended is about 70% native plant species. That way you can provide enough caterpillars to maintain bird populations. But also what happens is that you'll have a huge variety of predators, and most insects other than bees will feed their young other insects. So it's a big, it's a big fight out there to, wasps are notorious on caterpillars and pulling things back to their nests to feed their young. Bees are so nice. They feed their babies pollen and nectar. Well, everything else, everything else feeds everything to their young. They're carnivores.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like just because you're inviting keystone species in, you're not going to end up with no plants. Like they're all going to get eaten. So
Right.
thank you for
Yeah.
adding that. I
And
think
sometimes, yes, so sometimes it takes a little while for the insects to find them. I notice that I plant something in the garden. It's like, that's not getting eaten. This is, it's like, oh, you don't like what I'm presenting for dinner. But I waited long enough and they found it eventually because it's food. Who doesn't like food? Everything likes food. And they will find it eventually.
okay, so it may take some time.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we have one more question from Mr. McCormick, and the question reads, planting question for raised beds or creating mounds. We need soil, and that is not composty, otherwise it'll shrink down. We don't have any extra soil. Our yard is all sheet mulch, so do we dig large holes somewhere else in the yard, leaving a hole there, or is there soil we can buy? If so, what do you recommend?
My go-to for soil is cactus mix. It's highly drainable. It's got a nice structure to it, and there are different kinds. I like the Hoffman's. It has a really nice fluffy texture to it, but really any sort of cactus mix would be good. And some people actually mix in, for drainage purposes, decomposed granite, a little bit of the smaller gravel as well. If you want to dig holes, you can. That's, for me, that's too much work. I'd rather open a bag and dump it. Um, and and then kind of, shore up the sides of the mound with some boulders or something like that so it doesn't wash away. Plant stuff in it. Some people actually have a technique where they will use a pile of leaves and branches, put soil on top of that, and then plant into it. I would recommend experimenting, certainly, but cactus mix has been my go-to for, if I need more soil. And sometimes that happens. The soil in some of the gardens is like concrete sometimes, which is why I like to plant during the winter season when the ground is wetter and easier to dig, because I like to do as little work as possible. So if I don't have to dig a hole, because I'm not as young as I used to be, that's good. I'd much rather open a bag. Also, depending on what city you live in, here in Palo Alto, the city provides big piles of free compost that you can haul away, which has been a lifesaver for me because I do a lot of plant propagation, and soil becomes expensive over time. So what I'll do is I'll mix the free stuff with the more expensive stuff. And that's one way to get costs down.
Yeah, I think I've seen some customers purchase soil from like Waste Management. Like they have big heaps and stuff you can drive up and get to. So I don't know about you. I think you have the coolest job ever. Designing landscapes. Landscape architecture sounds so fun. And thank you for sharing some of what you've learned over the course of your career. And let us know how we can follow you. Is there
Yes.
certain handles you want to add into the chat? It looks like we had a few more come in actually.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. I also have some low production value videos on YouTube at Primrose Way. Usually it's just me and a camera on a tripod. But yeah, and so I on our Facebook page, I do post a lot of scientific articles because I am a scientist by training also. And so my goal is to be as optimal as possible in design. And so, you know, it's like when I look at function, it's like, okay, so native plants have a function of keeping water use down, but they do more than that. Their role in the environment is to maintain biodiversity by transferring the sun's energy up the food chain.
Cool. Well, we'll be following you. Okay, so this is the last question and then we'll let you go. For those of you that can hang on. Kathleen says, is that compost safe? A gardener told me that it's anaerobic because of the extreme heat used.
So, you know, what people do with the compost is they turn it so that you get air into the mixture so that it heats up and the organic material breaks down. Once it's cooled down, it's fine to use, but if it's still cooking, as they say, I wouldn't use it. I would wait for it to be finished. And, you know, if it's steaming, don't use it. You know, you want to wait for it to stop steaming first. And then, you know, mix it in with some cactus mix or some gravelly kind of mixtures if you want extra drainage. Maybe you're planting something that really doesn't like a lot of, you know, heavy soil. So you can experiment with that, certainly. But our plants are really evolved to manage in the soil that we have. Although many of the species do benefit from a handful or so of compost once a year around the top. I do that just to kind of, you know, because I like to baby my plants a little bit. I don't go overboard, certainly, because, you know, it's just like, if you want to live, you're going to live, you'll show me. You know, if you're not going to live, fine, I'll move on to my, you know, 8,000 other species I can pick and choose from. So if one thing works, there's, you know, don't lose heart. There's plenty else to try.
Don't get too attached.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Everyone in the chat is just saying thank you. You shared such a great perspective. So, and thank you all attendees for joining us tonight. And please take care of yourselves and we'll see you at the next workshop.
Thank
Bye,
you, Megan.
everyone.
Bye. Thanks.